Hi, my name is Louise Larson. I run August Consulting and I guide families that are on the road with high school students looking to apply to college and sort out that whole process. And this is a little bit of an extra webinar. I usually do a monthly webinar, but I said I would do this because several years ago, when I was doing live webinars in December, I know what a busy month December is, and I said, you know what, I'm going to do a recording for December because families are too busy to log in at a certain time. And it's ironic because that was the beginning of me saying, wait a minute, maybe I don't need to do live webinars. Maybe I can do recordings. And then someone said you could put them on YouTube. And I was like, I could. Okay. So anyway, that December, it's either 2020 or 2021 when I did a webinar in lieu of a live one. I did one, a recorded one about books in college admissions. And I think I got this idea because I don't know why, but somehow that webinar is getting a little bit of extra playing time in November. I don't know if it was something about the gifts or the holiday season. There was something that was leading people to it. And I thought it would be good to do several years later, like an update on that. And it was so funny because um when I looked at what I put out there, I was like, I had every book known to mankind. Like no one, I think I had like 40 books. I had like books on like the history of the SAT. I had books on Title IX. I was like, wow, this is a really comprehensive list of books. And my idea initially was to show some books that have come out since then that I've read. But really, I thought it would be good to show if I was to do like the top five, the top five, like, okay, thanks for the 40 books, Louise, but what's going to really help me figure out college admissions for my kid? So, if you heard clanking, I just took off a bracelet and hopefully there'll be no more clanking. So I am filming this on December 12th, and I'm only sharing that because it is like senior college admissions decision. We are in the zone. Northeastern released early decision last night. A couple of other schools have trickled out since Thanksgiving, but today, like Clemson's announcing, Princeton's announcing, Florida State's announcing for in-state early action kids, and tomorrow, Friday the 13th, is like probably 20 schools announcing early decision. So we're really kind of in the zone for that. So it seems like an apropos time to be talking about college admissions and sharing, more information. So let's see. I thought I would talk about, I'm going to talk about some books that I've read since that webinar. And then I thought I would give you like my top five. Like, okay, part of my goal of this webinar is like to boil down information to where it's more usable for families because there's so much out there. So since December of 2021, I've read a couple different books that I would recommend in varying not I'm looking at them. None of these are that parent. Some of these are not like they're interesting and they're good, but if you're really trying to get a kid through high school and college into college, maybe they're not as relevant. So this was a book called Breaking Ranks by Colin Diver, and he it says how the rankings industry rules higher education and what to do about it. Now he was the president of Reed College in Portland, Oregon, when Reed College said we're not gonna play with US News and World Report. We're not going to engage with the rankings. We're not going to report to the rankings. We're not playing that game. And the US News and World Report said, great, you're going to be, I don't know, they were in the top 50 and now you're going to be 320 now. Like they almost retaliated. So, this is a good book and it's interesting. If you're a parent trying to sort this out, this might not be the place to start, but it was a very good book. Um, I read this book is by a guy named Anthony Abraham Jack, and I'm actually going to talk about his other book. This came out, I don't know, sometime within the past 5 to 10 years. This book, The Privileged Poor, I am going to talk about. But this book, Anthony Abraham Jack, who actually goes by, people call him Tony Jack. Um, This book, Class Dismissed, just came out. When Colleges Ignore Inequality and Students Pay the Price. I liked it. It's a very interesting book. He takes he does a like a sociological research into Harvard students and how they fared during COVID, and whether they had, like, a vacation home to jet off to in Costa Rica with plenty of rooms and good Wi-Fi, or they went home and their family was like living in their car. Um, it's a good book. It's if you're trying to figure out, okay, how do I sort out my little 10th grader? How do I start to do this? Again, a good book might not be the place to start. Um, Never Enough. This book, Never Enough by Jennifer Braheny Wallace, When Achievement Culture Becomes Toxic and What to Do About It. If you're the parent of a high school student, yes, I would read this. It's not without fault. There are some things that, um, she lays out the never enough premise that the overachieving culture. She goes down some rabbit holes with her own personal experience, which aren't as useful, but she really sorts out, like, if you saw years ago, maybe 10 years ago, the movie The Race to Nowhere, she talks about kind of that same type of thing. So if you have a high school student, this would absolutely be one that you might read. This was another good one. Poison Ivy: How Elite Colleges Divide Us by a guy named Evan Mandery. And um, it was a really good book. I really liked it. And it kind of pokes some holes in, like, why a selective college might not be the best place for your kids. So I like this book. I have two here that are still on my to-read list. They're both freshly out. And one is called Burdened: Student Debt and the Making of an American Crisis by Ryan Liebenthal. I haven't, it's kind of bubbling to the top. I got it when I got Class Dismissed by Tony Jack, and I read that first. And the other one that I still have, that again I will probably get to over Christmas, is called The Admission Counselor Malaise, addressing the staff morale crisis in college admissions. Now, college admissions used to be a sleepier place, and you hear about, like, how there were leisurely summers, and it is a go-go production career now. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of metrics you have to meet. It's year round. It's a different thing. So I'm very eager to read that because it is very hard. It's not an easy job, and there's a lot of openings. There's a lot of openings for head admission counselors. So, dean of admissions or director of enrollment, whatever the title might be. It's a tough field. It's a very challenging field to be in these days. So that's what I've read since. And there's a couple, one or two more books here in my pile of kind of like, what if you were really going to recommend a couple books for me to read about, like, I've got a ninth, 10th, 11th grader. What would help me sort this out a little bit? So I said to myself, I would have to be five, only five. And that was hard. So it's my webinar, it's my thing. I can do whatever I want. So I have two honorable mentions. So I'm going to do two honorable mentions, and then the five that if you were like my neighbor and said, what can I do to start getting myself around this? The five books that I really feel would help you the most. So we will take a breath, and I know this is a stressful process. We'll take a breath and start with an honorable mention for Tony Jack's book, The Privileged Poor. If you are watching this, you probably speak English, you probably have internet, you probably have a computer, you probably are as educated either formally or informally that you aspire for your child to go to college. You probably have a credit card that works. You have a lot of things that you might take for granted. And if you read The Privileged Poor, at least you will have some perspective on what this is like for maybe kids that aren't highly resourced. So this book will at least help you catch your breath and say, okay, there's a whole big world out there. And yes, I'm going to have to help shepherd my kid through this, but when you read some of these stories, you're like, wow, it is exhausting to be an under-resourced child in this system. So the privileged poor would help you initially gain some perspective as you go through this. The other honorable mention, I think this book came out in 2015. 2015. Where You Go is Not Who You Will Be. An Antidote to the College Admissions Mania by Frank Bruni. Now, Frank Bruni is a New York Times columnist. He actually has done some teaching at Princeton, and I believe he is currently teaching at Duke. He's still writing for the New York Times too, and he had a book come out in the past year or two. He's losing his vision or has limited vision. Something's going on with his vision, and he had a book come out about that. But Where You Go is Not Who You Will Be. Will really give you some good perspective and sense of how this can all shake out. So those are my two honorable mentions. Privileged Poor and Where You Go is Not Who You Will Be. So now we're going to go to the top five. So in fifth place, I have The Debt Trap by Josh Mitchell. How Student Loans Became a National Catastrophe. Now, one of the problems in America is college is very expensive. And I was talking to a family friend of ours who was Canadian, and this person was deciding on colleges, and they had some colleges in Canada and some colleges in the Northeast. And the tuition at the Canadian schools was 5,000 Canadian dollars. Like that's what a year of tuition is. I don't know what room and board is, but the tuition is $5,000. And this person was looking at some Northeast private schools. And I said, well, what would that $90,000 a year school cost you in Canadian dollars? It was $120,000. So you could pay $5,000 for tuition plus room and board, or 120,000 Canadian dollars. And I say all that to say, in America, the money is real. You have to really get a sense of how does it work? Where do I fit in? Do I own an LLC where my tax return doesn't show a ton of money? Maybe you want to proceed one way. If you have a ton of home equity, maybe you want to proceed another way. If you have a cash business and you don't own a home, you're going to want to be looking at a different type of school. So the debt trap is a very good starting point to get your head around, okay, there's no college tooth fairy coming. When these schools all get up and say, we're committed to affordability, their idea of what is affordable for you and what you think is affordable is not maybe going to line up so well. I am eager. Now, this book, where did my book go? I'm curious to see how Burdened compares or overlaps with the debt trap. But I would start with the debt trap because getting your head around what it might cost and how you're going to manage that is a really important piece of this process. So that's my first one, book 5. Next up, and I put this here more because it kind of segs well with the debt trap, is The Price You Pay for College, an entirely new roadmap for the biggest financial decision your family will ever make. By Ron Lieber. He is also a New York Times writer. He's a personal finance writer for the New York Times, and he is a very accessible guy. I put stuff on Instagram like about this, and then he's commented on it, and I felt like I was, I don't know, very special that he was commenting on my stuff on Instagram. And I found it very interesting. Like last year when the FAFSA came out, he wrote about it in the New York Times, like on December 1st, whatever day, December 31st, he sat down the opening day and tried to do it and couldn't. And then this fall, he wrote about how he sat down and it was actually very easy to do. And he actually has a student in college. Now, I found this very interesting because you think, okay, he's a New York Times author, he's a New York Times journalist, and his wife is Jodi Kantor, she is also a New York Times investigative journalist, and she wrote like whatever the book that started the Me Too thing. She wrote the book that like started the Harvey Weinstein snowball that was like optioned to a movie. So I was like, well, these people don't need financial aid, but none of my business. He said that the FAFSA, that the Stafford loan was part of their plan. And I was like, wow, I would have thought that they just would have written a check, but he said no, they were taking Stafford loans to help kind of put the whole thing together. So for what that's worth, I thought that was interesting. So This is a pretty illuminating book. And I've heard him talk about this book where, I mean, he's a guy raising a family in New York City, and he talked about how his peers, his friends, his community, the people in his life, when they read this book, they called him and they were so angry. They were so angry after reading about how this works. And, um, it is the biggest financial decision your family will ever make. It's probably, depending on what kind of house you live in and when you bought it, you will probably, if you have two or three kids, pay more to college tuition than maybe you did to your house potentially. It's quite possible. So anyway, um, really illuminating. And I put that one next to the debt trap because they would be certainly they seg together pretty nicely in terms of all the information around college funding. Next up, Who Gets In and Why? A Year Inside College Admissions by Jeff Selingo. And Jeff Selingo is a very big name in college admissions. He used to write for the Chronicle. He's got like a newsletter. He's got a podcast. He actually has a new book coming out, and I think he keeps calling it like College for the Rest of Us. Like that's kind of the premise of the book. Like, okay, so here's this. If you're a high achiever, if you are can pay comfortably for an expensive full private school tuition, or you're like a high achieving student, but like his next book's going to be about like, okay, so what do the rest of us do? He gives a really good write up, like he talks about a year inside college admissions, and he was at uh he was at Davidson College. He was at Davidson College, University of Washington. I should have double checked this before I started this. He was at three very different colleges. He was at a big state flagship, a really small selective, and then something in the middle. Oh, this one's even signed. I forgot this is my signed copy. I don't even know where I got the signed copy. But he embedded himself in three different admissions offices and just walks through the whole thing. So it's a very good primer on how this works. Um, so the other book, so that's number three. So then my number two book is a newer book. This just came out this year. The Lifting the Veil on Enrollment Management, How a Powerful Industry is Eliminating, I'm sorry, How a Powerful Industry is Limiting Social Mobility in American Higher Education. Now, if you have a child that is coming through this college admissions process, this is a very good book. And I think it was my either October or November webinar that I actually focused and like unpacked this a little bit. And then when I listened to myself, I was like, oh my gosh. And I think I did this in October, and like I apologize in November for how many rabbit holes I went down, but there's a lot of information in here. And you have your little high school student who's doing their homework and taking rigorous classes and participating in extracurriculars, and you're kind of bringing them to this threshold where they're going to be evaluated. And when you see how enrollment management really works, it's not so much personally about your child who's staying up late and getting work done. It's really not about them so much. It's more about the school, filling seats, their big businesses, and what their goals are. It's not that personally about your child. So this is a really good one that will help you settle to go, okay, my kid's gonna apply to colleges and it's gonna be okay and they'll get in somewhere. And it really isn't a judgment on them personally if they are not admitted somewhere. So this is a very illuminating book. So the number one book, if you were to really say, what would really give me like a front row seat to the whole thing is Valedictorians at the Gate. Now, I've not seen this book out and about too much. It's by a woman named Becky Munster Sadke, Standing Out, Getting In, and Staying Sane while Applying to College. Now, she is actually from New Jersey, where I am. I mean, not, I'm in New Jersey. She's from New Jersey. I don't think she lives in New Jersey anymore. And she was an admissions officer at Dartmouth, where I believe she applied binding early decision and didn't get in. And I also applied binding early to Dartmouth and did not get in. So I felt like kinship with her. I'm like, oh, you're from New Jersey, you didn't get into Dartmouth. And she ended up working at Dartmouth. And she just takes you behind the scenes of the whole thing. And you get a sense like her job was really to generate applications for Dartmouth. So when people would say, well, I only have an 1100 on my SAT and I have a B average, she wouldn't say, you know what, you're right, don't apply. She would say, well, you never know. Like, and that they still say you never know, because if you're a harpist from North Dakota, you might get in. But so anyway, my number one book that I would say, if you really wanted to get a sense of what is going on with all this, is Valedictorians at the Gate. This book came out in 2021. So Rebecca Sadke is who the copyright is under. So just a little recap. I will give you a quick recap on what my suggestions are. And I would for sure say, here we go. Read The Privileged Poor, or read all the other books and then read The Privileged Poor, and you'll go, okay, my kid's pretty lucky. That for sure. Certainly Where You Go Is Not Who You Will Be is a very quick read, not particularly long. Next up, these two books really tackle cost and how you might be evaluated in your ability to pay. And then these two books give you a deep sense of what goes on in the actual admissions office. And finally, this one gives you a better sense of higher ed in general and enrollment management. So if you have a senior and they're in the heart of finding out some answers, good luck. If you're celebrating holidays of any sort, happy holidays. I will be back in January, and be well.